everything about quadratic equation. All right, so now the quadratic equation is of the form. This is the general form: ax squared plus bx plus c equals to 0. This is the general form of the quadratic equation. And while this is here, it's an equation because there's an equality sign. Without the equality sign here, we'll be having a quadratic expression. So it's an equation because of the equality sign we have here. Then the next thing we have to pay attention to are the coefficients of the variables. When we mean the variables, x here is a variable and x here is a variable. It's a variable because it can take any value. All right, variable means changing. But then we have coefficient of each of these variables. Like the x square here, the coefficient is what? Is a. And then the x here, the coefficient is b. And then we have the c. The c here represents the constant in this equation. Now, every question, the highest power of a quadratic equation is 2. So you must know that the highest power of what? A quadratic equation is 2. So if you see an expression or an equation of this form whose highest power is not 2 or is less than 2, that means it's not a quadratic equation. So the highest power of a quadratic equation is 2. So you have to bear that in mind. Now we pick out the constant, the basic parameters, which is the a, the b, and then we have the c, which is the constant. Right? These are the three things we have, or we can see. We can actually, apply most of the times, or we work with most of the times to be able to find the variable x. All right. So our attention most of the time is drawn to the a, which is the coefficient of the x squared, the b, which is the coefficient of the x, and then the constant. That is where we have our attention, and that is what we are able to solve to get the final value of what? Of x. That's one thing you must understand. Sorry, let me get my duster. Okay, so these are the things you must understand. That's the first thing you have to understand. So the next thing you need to know is, why do we solve quadratic equation? We solve quadratic equation in order to be able to find the roots of equation. All right, because we want to find the roots of our equation. That's why we are solving the quadratic equation. Now we have gone from the different methods, all right, and we're going to briefly go through those processes again and find out. To be able to drive down our point, we need to go through the processes. The first method we have is the factorization method, and that's a very popular method. We'll take a question here: x squared plus 2x plus 1 is equals to 0. For example, let's say x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals to 0. So this is a very good example of quadratic equation, all right, because it is very similar to the general form of a quadratic equation that was shown or was written earlier before this time. So we can actually compare this. So we can see the trinomial. We can see that what? We have this term, we have this term, and we have this. Now, the one here represents the constants. We have our x, and then we have 2 here representing the b. Then we have our x, and we have our a. The constant, the coefficient of x squared in this case will be what? 1. So since it's 1, we don't need to write the 1. That's why I didn't write it there. But then let's pay attention that it will always come in this form. But beyond this, there are some intricacies that we need to understand, and that is the essence of this lesson. All right, so now for us to solve using the factorization method, it's always very easy for us to solve. We know that to solve using the factorization method, we want to find out a factor. If we had a coefficient here, the coefficient, we have a coefficient which is 1. 1 times 1 is going to give us what? 1. All right. So in order to factorize our quadratic equation, all right, we need to, since we're having 1 as a factor, we need to look for a factor that can be multiplied to give us 1. And that can also, and when I mean 1, positive 1. All right. Then that can also be what? Added or summed together to give us what? Plus 2. All right. So since we have, and this is 1 is the multiplication of the coefficient of x squared, and 1 is 1, right? So this is what we have. So I can say, okay, let me bring down my x here, which is a regular way of solving the factorization method. Then the sign here will have to follow. The sign here will have to follow. Then the next thing I'm going to do will be for me to find out what is going to be here. Now, I know that 1 times 1 is going to give me 1. That means it's agreed. And 1 plus 1 is going to give me what? 2. So I can easily fit in my 1 here. All right. So once I do this, then it will be right for me to equate this equals to 0 and this equals to 0. All right. So having done this, I am going to do what? I am going to add, or I am going to subtract 1 from both sides in order to find the root of my equation. So to find the root of this quadratic equation, I'm just simply going to subtract 1 from both sides. So that will, if I'm doing that, that will be x will be equals to minus 1, because 1 going over to the other side becomes minus 1, or x is also going to be equals to what? Minus 1. Minus 1. So in this case, we're having the same roots. We're having the same roots. So it simply means that on our graph, we have a minus 1 here. On our graph, we have a minus 1 here. So the quadratic graph is just going to touch the x-axis at this point, meaning that we're having a double root. We're having a double root at this point. So this is going to be the form in which this particular root will, or this particular quadratic graph is going to come out. We're going to have a parabola, and then with the bottom just touching this point, minus 1 point on the x-axis, right? On the x-axis. So that's just it. And this method is very common. But this evening, we're going to go straight to completing the square